Jeff Rowe from Two Hacks Garage. Well, I guess the title of the video says it all. Trolling before trolling was a thing. Yep. We all know in today's world of trolling online, it's kind of drama. Not a really big fan of drama. However, some of it's funny. Trolling, you know what? It's pretty easy definition. Deliberately posting something online to pretty much get underneath someone's skin. But did you know trolling has its roots going back way, 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 way long ago, especially in drag racing? Back in the day, match racing was king. And I tell you what, those guys trolled each other a lot. This video isn't really about that. It's about one specific example of trolling. Back in 1965, Mr. Norm of Grand Spaulding Dodge, he had one of the hottest match racing cars in the country. It was a 1965 factory Alta wheelbase car, one of the AFX ones. In fact, we're going to go over that here in a second. You can see the car right here. That car was a match race basher. I mean, it was laying down some solid times. And everyone was gunning for him, including the Texas teenager, Don Gay, who had a pretty wild Pontiac. And these guys actually had a lot more in common than people think. I know that sounds a little bit odd, but I'll talk about that here in a few. So yeah, this video is about an epic back and forth trolling incident before trolling was really a thing. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but let's kind of dive into that right now. All right, first off, we're going to talk the cars before we talk the people in this epic back and forth trolling incident in 1965. So what I have here, these are from Drag News, and I don't have them all, but I have most of them to explain the story. Plus, I knew Norm pretty well and was on the road with him a lot, and I got to hear these stories for hours and hours and hours. Anyway, these guys trolled each other in Drag News. Yeah, you heard that right. They literally wrote letters, sent them to Drag News printed them, and people read them. Today's world, you can just get on your phone, hit post, and people see it immediately. Back then, it took some time. So this really took some effort. These guys trolled each other pretty hard, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. It's absolutely epic. But first off, let's talk cars. Mr. Norm's car, well, you can see it right here. Well, that is a factory AFX car. He bought that car from Roger Lindemood, and it was originally the Color Me Gone car. When he purchased it, first off, he ended up just painting it. And if you look at the paint schemes, they're actually really close. Here's a picture here before they changed anything. Literally no wheels or nothing, just a paint job. And they went down south and raced the car. But soon to be, he added his blown 426 on nitro, throws it in there, and that car was just an absolute beast. It match raced completely all over the country. The booking on it was crazy. He had big competitors all the time. A couple of his big competitors that everybody really knows about is the Ram Chargers especially. And the other part about it is the biggest competitor probably in the Pontiac world was Arnie Beswick. And we're going to touch on that here in a little bit because there is a correlation between Arnie Beswick and Don Gay. But there was another Pontiac that he was ruthlessly involved with when it came to trolling, subject to this, and match racing, and that was Don Gay. So I tell you what, guys, let's get into Don Gay's Pontiac. Don Gay's car, well, that was a 1965 Pontiac GTO. No, it wasn't some factory altered wheelbase car like Mr. Norm's. However, it was a brand new car that Don took, and he moved the rear and front wheelbase forward like an altered wheelbase car, added a bunch of fiberglass to it, gutted it, really lightened it up, and instead of having the 389 power underneath the hood, well, that thing was sporting 421 cubic inches of Super Duty Pontiac power. It was also supercharged and on nitro. Early on, he had some issues with the nitromethane in that, but once he got the learning curve, that car was really laying down some awesome times. So, looking at those two cars right there, well, one of them is a factory altered wheelbase car. Norm didn't get it from the factory. Like I said, he bought it from Roger Lindemood. He made a whole bunch of changes to it. It was acid dip, lightweight, and it had that blown 426 Hemi. His matchup, like I just said, it was a extremely light and altered wheelbase Pontiac GTO that was a homebrew build, and it was sporting 421 cubic inches of Pontiac Super Duty power, also on nitro with the supercharger. So this matchup right now, you know what? It's looking pretty interesting. Almost the same cubic inches, both supercharged, both on nitro. And you know what, guys? Both of them altered wheelbase, lightweight beasts. All right, so we just talked about the cars. You can kind of see I'm setting this up like a heavyweight match fight back in the day. Now let's talk about the people. We're going to start off with Mr. Norm. You're going to see in this that these two people have a lot more in common than you think. And this is going to play into the letters that I'm going to read to you here in just a few minutes. So Mr. Norm, okay, we all know him as Mr. Norm. His real name was Norm Kraus. Norm Kraus had a brother named Lenny, and Norm and Lenny, back in the day, they sold used cars out of their dad's service station at 3300 West Grand Avenue, the famous, iconic Mr. Norm's Grand Spaulding Dodge. So the location that we all know as in that iconic picture, well, that actually was originally on that location, his dad's service station going back to the 20s. In the 40s and 50s, Norm and his brother, they started selling used cars out of there, mainly hot rod style cars. And the reason he got the name Mr. Norm was because they would advertise in the Chicago Sun-Times, and there was a word limit in there, character limit, and just to shorten everything up, instead of calling Norman Kraus, it was called Mr. Norm. So that's how he got the name. And then the rest was history with the drag racing and the high performance Dodge dealership. So Norm and his brother Lenny, actually, they worked at Grand Spaulding Dodge. The overall owner of that was their dad, Harvey. And he was kind of the brains behind the business piece of it. Obviously, Norm was too. Norm was really big into marketing, and he was able to market those Mopars probably better than anybody in the country. In fact, for many years, he was the #1 Dodge dealership in the nation. For many of those years, he focused on high-performance Mopars. And what really got his name out there, well, that was drag racing. But a lot of people don't know is he didn't always have the match racing AFX nitro cars and then moving on funny cars. In 1963, he started off as Grand Spaulding Dodge and didn't know a lot about the high performance aspect of that at the time. Like I said, they were just selling used cars, any makes, any models, everything they can make money off of. And in 1963, he had gotten a hold of a lot of max wedge cars. And kind of a funny story behind that is they got them in the winter, couldn't get them to start. They were kind of a nightmare. Anyway, one of those cars was actually bought by a customer and raced indoors at the Chicago Amphitheater. And that guy put Norm's name on the side of it in exchange for things like spark plugs, race belts, and stuff like that. But in 1964, he decided to form a race team. And that was Pat Minnick and John Forconis. Those names should sound familiar. They went on to become the famed Chi-Town Hustler team. There was two cars. Both of them were 64 Dodges. One of them was a max wedge car, and the other one was a Hemi car. It was the Hustler 1, and it was the Hustler 2. Those things were super competitive in all kinds of drag racing. However, they weren't the match race bashers of the day. They did very well, but one of the things Norm really wanted to focus on was selling cars to customers, that performance-proven know-how. So he didn't really want to get out there and be racing cars that he would be able to sell to the customers and always beat them. So it was kind of a bad look, if you want to say, because those 64 Dodges that he sold were available to the customers. And he wanted everything available to his customers, what he had available to him. So there was a little bit of talk back and forth, this, that, and the other. And the Pat Minnick, John Forconis team, they went their way and Norm went his way. And he soon picked up Gary Dyer. So the whole Mr. Norm Don Gay matchup thing, well, that's kind of just names in a way, because Mr. Norm didn't actually drive the car. In 1964, late 64, early 65, when Gary Dyer came on, they quickly took a 65 Dodge. They altered the wheelbase on it. They put a supercharged Hemi in there, and they hit the match race circuit and was extremely successful, especially when they got on nitro. So at that point, when you're just match racing, you're match racing other big names, and you don't have to match race your actual customers or race against them. So it was a very good business move. Besides that, match racing was really king at the time, so there was more money involved in that. When there's more money, well, they're building faster cars and getting their name out more. So yeah, 1965, their first altered wheelbase car was a homebrew car. But however, it wasn't Norm actually driving it. So the matchup, like I said, of Mr. Norm and Don Gay was kind of just in name only. When they did get that Roger Lindemuth car, the drivetrain out of that 65 homebrew altered wheelbase car, which was like a kind of like a wine-colored red car. That quickly went into the Roger Lindenmuth car after they painted it, raced it a little bit, and that thing became an absolute success. That thing was an absolute beast. One cool thing about the Grand Spaulding story on that, so like I said, Norm had a brother, and their dad owned the dealership, and they worked for him, and they raced for him, and they marketed everything for him. So it was kind of like that awesome family business. Started off small and became real big. Grand Spaulding Dodge, well, that was open from as a Dodge dealership from roughly 1963 to 1978. So with that, there's a little bit of background behind that. And I'm going to get into Don Gay here in a second, but I'm just going to say this. After I do the Don Gay piece on how his stuff comes up, we're going to talk about how Norm was probably one of the best people at actually trolling back in the day. All right, well, it's time to talk about Don Gay. And here's where the similarities kind of line up between Don and Norm. Like Norm, Don had a brother. His name was Roy. Just like Norm, who had worked for his dad at Grand Spaulding Dodge, just like Lenny. Well, guess what? Don's parents, Carl and Marie, they started Gay Pontiac in Dickinson, Texas in 1948. The only difference is instead of like Norm and Lenny, who sold cars and focused on the marketing aspect and used drag racing to heavily promote their high performance division, Don and Roy actually raced for their parents at that dealership. You see, once Detroit started focusing on high-performance cars, the Dickinson-based Gay Pontiac, well, they bought Freeway Drag Strip and actually ended up calling it Houston Drag Raceway later on, and that became Houston International Raceway. So before Don actually had any involvement in the dealership, he was a very, very competitive athlete in school, primarily in baseball and basketball. However, that all changed in 1961 when Gay Pontiac booked Hayden Profit and his Mickey Thompson owned 421 cubic inch Super Duty Pontiac Catalina AFX car. That was in 1961 and Don was 14. From where the sports was his primary focus and where he was extremely competitive, that day ultimately changed his life. See, at the time in Texas, at the age of 14, you could actually drive. So while Don really enjoyed his sports, well, you know what? He really caught that drag racing bug. And quickly himself, he got into drag racing. Within a year, he actually had 2 race cars. He had an A-stock Pontiac Catalina and an A-modified production Catalina wagon. His brother Roy, well, you can just say he was stricken by the drag racing bug also, and he ran a B-stock GTO. Both brothers successfully campaigned these cars, and they might as well just kept racing those cars under the family dealership name, and they would have won a ton of races throughout the years. However, fate would have it again with another booking that his dad did. Yep, in 1964, the Gay family at their drag strip, well, they booked Arnie the Farmer Beswick in his fuel-burning 1964 blown GTO. This was a 421 cubic inch powered Pontiac, and at the time, it was setting the world on fire. In fact, that ended up leading to an Arnie Beswick and a Gay Pontiac partnership, as you can see in these photos. But I tell you what, guys, let's talk about how that booking, once again, changed the path of Don Gay and his drag racing. So how did that day change the fate, once again, of Don Gay's racing career? Well, the entire family was actually in awe of how Beswick's car performed at that track. They quickly decided to take their focus from the stockers to the fuelers. Mechanic James Osteen, well, he led the charge on a brand new 1965 GTO right off the lot. They moved the wheelbase forward 5 inches, put a bunch of fiberglass parts on it to lighten it up, yanked that 389 out, and put in a supercharged Pontiac 421. The car was actually named Infinity. That was from a line at the beginning of the Ben Casey TV show, Man, Woman, Birth, Death, Infinity. Pretty neat history right there, I thought. Well, the maiden voyage of this car was in July of 1965. That car bit pretty hard, although they ended up breaking it, and that maiden voyage, though, was against none other than Dino Don. A month later, they decided to go on nitro. That also kind of ended up in some catastrophe. They doubled the charge of nitro they actually needed, quickly blowing up the engine. That is an absolute learning curve. However, the Gay family, they weren't giving up. Once they got that car sorted out, it was a force to be reckoned with, just like Arnie Beswick's car. It was quickly shutting down names across the country, even names famed like Sox and Martins. So far, this sounds like a pretty even matchup. You got two families, both of them own dealership, both of them have sons that work there, and both of them are heavily involved into drag racing. However, that being said, there is one little caveat. Well, there's the experience factor. To the contrary, Norm was not an old man when this was going on. He was a young guy in his late 20s, early 30s, but Don was much younger. Norm had already had the experience with his race team going across the country, match racing with a very cool, calm, and collective driver in Gary Dyer. See, that was the thing right there. Gary was the driver. Norm was the marketing kind of guy, if you want to call it the mouth. Don, he kind of had to fill both roles, and he was a very enthusiastic young driver, really wanting to win races. He was calling everybody out. He was going out there, win, lose, or draw. You know what? He gave it his all. But when it came to trolling, well, that's where Norm already had the advantage on that. If you look at this picture right here, that is a character drawing of the Ram Chargers. You see, one of Norm's biggest competitors was the Ram Chargers. They were a factory-backed group out of Detroit, Michigan, and you know what? Those guys were fast, and Norm and the Ram Chargers had some epic duels. Early on, you know what? Norm did get the best of him quite a bit, and just to kind of poke fun at him and troll him, he had that character drawn right there. Let's take a couple other looks at some examples throughout the years, just how good at trolling Norm was. Well, here's a picture right here. This is from 1972. In 1972, well, Dodge, they were catching a lot of flack of naming the dart sport the Demon. So what did he do as a publicity stunt? Well, like any other normal person would do, went out and rented a devil output, went out in front of the dealership, and just set the marketing world on fire with that nice publicity stunt, trolling at one of its finest. How else did Norm troll people? Well, if you look here, this is a promotional ad for the model cars MPC made of the funny car in 1968. If you see, it's got a tombstone there and a bunch of little stickers. Well, that just wasn't for promotion. You see, on Norm's cars and also his car haulers, he had those little tombstones painted on there. And each time he actually won a race against those people, anybody he raced, he actually wrote that name on there. In fact, there's a famed picture of Mickey Thompson laughing it off because his name got put on there. So yes, Norm was really good at trolling. He did it in many different ways. In fact, on the road, he told me in some cases, he would have someone fly overhead and drop leaflets making fun of his competition. That being said, Norm had a great sense of humor and would also troll himself. Here's a picture of here later on in the 70s where he packed himself into a Dodge Aspen go-kart for a promotional race. Absolutely funny. Heck, he's even trolling his brother right here, also the late 70s, where they went to take a picture and he's acting like he's going to give him a kiss on the cheek. However, when you give it, you got to be able to take it. Here's a couple pictures right here. This one here is at Cordova. This is a picture of, actually, I'll read it here in a second, but in the picture here, it is of an old beat up Dodge on a manure spreader that says Grand Spaulding Dodge. Arnie Beswick did that at his home track at Cordova when Mr. Norm showed up. You know what? I'm sure when Norm showed up with his team in race mode, he had to laugh a little bit about that. Now, that picture is signed by both Arnie and Norm. And if you look closely and read it, well, when I was hanging out with the two guys in McCacken, I think around 2009, 2010, they were still trolling each other all those years later. Just read it right there. It's absolutely hilarious. So I'm just going to say Norm had the advantage, not only with an experienced driver, but he was also one heck of a mouth and really knew how to troll people. Heck, in 1966 or 1967, he even sent out Christmas cards to his customers and friends. And if you look here, he's trash talking his competition. Now, that is a pretty epic troll. It's a holiday, and you know what? He still has that sense of humor and that spirit, really to rile people up and really to get that drag racing theme going. You know what, though? The people he didn't trash were his customers. He was extremely, extremely, extremely grateful for that. And he even got in the game of doing stuff for all the kids and the teenagers. Seen here, well, he's got an event going on, part of his sport club, where he's got a band playing. And then here, he's actually giving away some of those cool HO race car sets that Dodge put out. Now, when it came to trolling, a lot of that mouth talking was what we're going to get to here in a second, either in drag news or those character paintings. But you know what, guys? When it really came down to it, if you look at these pictures here, you can see how serious he was once he hit the track. So it was a kind of a psychological thing. Talk a bunch of trash, have a cool, calm, and collective driver, and when you hit the track, you are extremely serious and you are ready to shut down your competition. Now, let's get into the epic back and forth trolling of Don Gay and Mr. Norm. All right. Here's something cool. These are the original drag news articles that have the letters, two of them that I know of the back and forth epic trolling between Don Gay and Mr. Norm. The first one I don't have, but from what I gather, the gist of it was Don Gay felt that Norm was avoiding him every single time he was calling him out for a match race. Just couldn't get that race set up. I'm sure he might have been avoiding him a little bit, but also I'm sure Norm was just booked out the max across the country in racing. So at some point, Don Gay actually wrote a letter into drag news calling Norm out to a race. Well, Norm finally got a hold of that letter, saw it, and he read it, and he actually wrote a response, and he sent it to drag news. Like I said, this is effort into trolling, because like on your phone, you can just do, hit post, and you know what? It's out there for the world to see. But like I said, back then, you actually had to take the time, write a letter, and send it off, get it printed, and have people read it. So there was a little bit of a time lag there. So sometime in July of 1965. Now remember, in July of 1965 is when Don Gay had his maiden voyage in the Infiniti, and he started doing the racing and all that stuff. So he was very wet behind the ears, while Norm quite wasn't, because he had already been trash talking and he already shut down a lot of people, and he had a very cool and calm collective driver in Gary Dyer. So let's read the response of Mr. Norm's letter, which I will put right up here. Dear Don Gay, in response to your letter of challenge in drag news, we would like you and the drag racing fans to know our position. Here at Grand Spaulding Dodge, performance is our business. We race our cars all around the country to enhance our knowledge of performance under the stress and strain of competition. This know-how is then applied to our business to servicing the cars that we sell. We don't race for prizes, pennants, or glory. We race our blown Hemi and our AFX because performance is our business. And in order to better in our business, we must be better on the tracks. Because of this, we go to great expense to travel to various strips and tracks around the country, racing cars that will add to our knowledge and know-how. We race such top-name performers as Arnie Beswick, Stone Woods and Cook, and other men who know and love drag racing. We are willing to run our cars against anyone, anywhere who has proven himself and his car, because there is always something that we can learn from honest competition. At this point, you have proven nothing but your ability to insert and add in drag news. Take our advice. Go out and get yourself a reputation. Earn it by racing against such great runners as we have mentioned above. Don't try to get a quick reputation by challenging the giants. But in true spirit of competition, and because we like to see ambitious and aggressive youngsters try his mettle, we might consider matching our Hemi against your car. That is, if you can prove that you deserve a crack at us. Talking big doesn't make you big. Our fans have a right to wave banners. We have given them that right by the records we have hung up for Johnny-come-latelys like you to shoot at. Our records weren't earned on a track owned and operated by our father. If we had a dad who owned a track and were being clocked by hired hands, we'd turn 820s, but we wouldn't brag about it. We're not shutting you off. We're sure an aggressive youngster like you will find a way to get where he wants to be. There have always been instances where youngsters have been known to break records. This is where they separate the men from the boys, Mr. Norm. So as you can see in that letter into the response of a very young, ambitious racer in Don Gay, he's speaking business. He's really not trash talking. He's laying it down saying, hey, we earn this and you do too. However, in the true fashion of trolling and trash talking, he goes in there and throws a jab at Don Gay because Don Gay's family owned a drag strip. And back in the day, there was a lot of rumors of some drag strips that would, let's just say, alter the clocks a little bit to make their hometown hero make it look just that faster. There was a lot of that going on between Mr. Norm and the Ram Chargers whenever they would race. So there was always that, hey, let's find a neutral track. So yes, that was Mr. Norm's response to Don Gay of his letter. So this was the first part of that trolling. As you can see, he stuck to business. He stuck to earning it. And then he threw in just a little bit of trash talking, even kind of poked fun at his age just a little bit. So the race did happen. And let's just say, well, Don Gay wasn't exactly happy. And he wrote a letter into Drag News again. And this is from the August 28th, 1965 Drag News. And the letter is dated August 25th, 1965. Dear Mr. Norm, well, the Cassius Clay of drag racing finally stopped making excuses long enough to schedule his Dodge in a mass race against my Pontiac. You are right about one thing, Mr. Norm. It's time to stop writing letters and get down to business. The business of drag racing, that is. Frankly, I wasn't sure that you'd ever agree to a race. I suppose all of you Dodge and Plymouth boys with factory or dealer sponsors could go on and just racing each other all the time, never proving anything, really, except that the races are good performance tests. And now you get a chance to prove that 426 Hemi Dodge of yours against my little old 421 Pontiac that's been set up and maintained in our little old Pontiac agency here in this little old town of Dickinson. Man, I am so anxious to pair off with you that I can hardly wait for September 12th and our meeting of the Great Lakes Dragway in Union Grove, Wisconsin. You know, us kids, how us kids are. Always anxious. My, oh my, Mr. Norm, I do hope you know that you're letting yourself in for. You know, I've already shut down 2 Mopars. Yeah, I put it to the Melrose Missile just a couple of weeks ago. And shortly before that, it was Ronnie Sox who bowed to my Pontiac. But then most of the guys always did what Save Their Parachute looks like. Doesn't that worry you just a little bit, Mr. Norm? Now it's your turn. I would suggest that you do 2 things. First and most important, be sure that your Dodge will fire up when it comes to line and that it will hold together long enough for us to compete in the race. I'll let you in on a little secret. My Pontiac is going to be in prime shape for this one. And second, I would suggest that you tell all the members of your fan clubs to be at Great Lakes Drag Strip when September 12th rolls around. Because I feel confident that General Motors boosters will be out in full force on my side of the strip to cheer me on. Tell me, Mr. Norm, is it true you use cheerleaders? I understand that Bob Metzler, who operates the Great Lakes Dragway, has put up $1,500 for the winner of our match race. Now, where I come from, Mr. Norm, $1,500 is a lot of grass. We call grass money in these parts. I guess you know that I intend to mow that $1,500 and bring it back to Texas with me. But there is some hope for you too, Mr. Norm. Bob Metzler has been kind enough to put up an additional $300 for the loser of the race. Of course, I suppose you sponsored dudes from the big city really don't need the money, but it's there anyway. Remember, Mr. Norm, that's Great Lakes Dragway in Union Grove, Wisconsin on September 12th. See you all there. Don Gay, the Infiniti GTO, Dickinson, Texas. All right. As you can see, that letter in response to Norm accepting the race, well, let's just say Don went into very fiery response. A lot of trash talking. Boy, he was a young, ambitious guy, really wanting to make a name for himself. And you know what? I don't blame him. Because early on in his first month or so of drag racing, he did have success. He did shut down the Melrose Missile. He did shut down Ronnie Sox. So a young guy like that with a lot of grit, very competitive, well, of course, he wants a shot at, you know, people like Mr. Norm. Because at the time, Mr. Norm was the guy to beat in match racing. So, you know what? He sits there. There's a couple things I do want to point out, though. He talks about Norm being like factory backed. Norm wasn't factory backed. In fact, like I mentioned earlier, this is where this comes into play. Both of them come from family dealerships. Both of them have kind of an advantage over a lot of other people of being at a dealership, having access to parts, mechanics, you name it. So on that part of it, I'm just going to say Don kind of put his foot in his mouth on that one. Now, I will say this, though, where he didn't put his foot in his mouth, well, he talked about that 421 cubic inch Pontiac. Now, the Hemis did rule the day of match racing. However, people like Arnie Beswick were quickly putting those Pontiacs in the limelight. Same with Mickey Thompson. And as you can see, Don Gay was adding the fuel to the fire on those really potent supercharged Pontiac AFX cars. So, yeah, that was his response. And he was letting the fans know, hey, here's the date. Here's where we're going to be. Here's what's going to happen. Poking fun at him. Trolling. So this is the first part of the trolling. The response, which was, I'll just say, business-oriented. Hey, you got to earn it. A little bit of trash talking to a fiery young Texas teenager, really talking trash, really trying to get underneath his skin, really pushing that Pontiac power and making fun of the Dodge guys because the Dodge guys were king at the time, and he already shut down a lot of Dodges. So, yeah, he kind of did earn his spot to make this race. So, I guess we need to find out, well, what happened in that race and what was the response. All right, so how did the race go? So we saw the back and forth trolling there, which is actually kind of funny. Seeing back in the day, both these groups of guys, Mr. Norm's team and Don Gay's team, highly respectable in all regards. But man, there was some trolling, a little bit of trash talking, and obviously they're talking it up for the crowd. But how did the race go? Well, let's just say Norm got the better of Don Gay. So what did Don Gay do? Well, he ended up writing another letter, somewhat, if you want to call in protest. He seemed a little bit upset on what happened at the race. So what happened at the race? Well, let's just read you Don Gay's perspective of the race in September at Great Lakes Dragway between him and Mr. Norm. Dear Mr. Norm, no one likes to lose, and I'm no exception. But it's easier to accept a loss if it's a fair race. I don't want to be looked upon as a poor loser, but my feelings on our match race are such that I am compelled to write this letter so that everyone will know just what happened. Our first race, which was at Union Grove, Wisconsin drag strip, is one that needs to be explained, for it was hardly typical of drag racing, as a sport, that is. Remember how it went? The first and second rounds resulted in a draw, with the third and last round to be the deciding race. Regarding the third round, Mr. Norm, that's the one we need to talk about. Your car started for my side of the strip, which forced me to shut down. Then your car left the drag strip, went off the side, and kicked up a rooster tail of dust and dirt. Meanwhile, I crossed the finish line, coasting, assuming that your car would automatically be disqualified. The rule books you used at Union Grove clearly states that if a car leaves the strip, crosses the center line, or goes out of the other outer extremities, it is disqualified. See page 35 of the rule book. Right after the race, I was declared the winner, but another version came out later. As indicated, I don't want to be branded as a poor loser, but I want everyone to know and give a fair warning to anyone else who may have had an opportunity to race you in match race that I've learned a couple of lessons. One, never race you, Mr. Norm, on one of your home strips. The only way to deal with you is on a neutral strip. It is unfortunate that you have declined any offers to race me elsewhere, but that figures. Number two, I learned that in match race against you, lights have to be used, such as the countdown starter to avoid a match race. Pulled the green all the way up to his shoulders, to his head to start the race, and then after seeing who was out ahead of me, called a foul by raising his red flag after the race was already well underway. No, I'm not bitter, because I know in my own mind that in a fair race, you're a loser, Mr. Norm. Even this kid from Texas can figure that much out. Judging from the boos and harassment you get from the crowds, I'm not the only one who knows the story. Don Gay, Gay Pontiac, the Infiniti GTO. So who won that race? Well, it sounds like Norm went off the track and Don Gay went through the finish lines, but it sounds like he's more upset that the fact that he didn't like the way this was started, and he thinks the starter gave Norm the advantage and disqualified him right off the boot. So that's kind of interesting. This letter is much different. So if you saw Norm's letter in response to being called out, Norm was about business. earned this race and trash talked a little bit, and then you saw the fiery response from Don Gay for the match race, and then you see what happens here. Absolute circus. Who knows what really happened? Did he get did Norm get, a flag before Don Gay? Did Don Gay actually jump the gun? Who really knows? But you know what? This makes for absolute epic trolling. I do know these guys went on to match race many other times. And I do want to be clear on one thing, as you can see in this picture right here. That's Norm, that's Don Gay, and that's Gary Dyer. They're getting suited up. They're getting ready for a match race. While this makes for trolling excitement, if you want to call it drama, look at the smiles on their faces, okay? This here, what you see here, it's competitiveness. These guys truly did have respect for each other in every sort of way. Yes, on the track, things got heated. That's where the business happened. Off the track, they're trash talking. They're running their mouths. They're doing this. That's just a really big buildup. That's marketing. That gets the fans involved. But like I showed you earlier, at the track, it is business. And you can name any of those drivers from back in the day that were super competitive. Once they hit the track, they were down to business and racing. Whatever happened at those tracks, like I said, a lot of people wanted a neutral track. There was always rumors of cheating, bad timing clocks, you name it, and go on. It made for some very exciting racing. These guys did go on to match race a lot. Even though he says in here, you've declined, they raced a ton after that. But just a little bit of trolling after this letter. If you look at this picture here, another character drawing in Norm's shop of Don Gay. There's a little bit of wordplay in there, and it's basically making fun of Don Gay as a redneck, and it's basically saying, hey, if you get upset again, don't worry, maybe your mom will write you a letter this time. It's all in jest. It's all in fun, because like I said, if you look at that picture once again, they're all smiling. They're getting ready to have a whole lot of fun. So yeah, absolutely epic. In fact, I'm not saying add insult to injury, but these guys did go at it a lot. And the one thing that really put Norm on the map is probably one of the biggest AFX drag racers. One night at Lions Drag Strip, which is absolutely a neutral track for both those guys, probably one of the biggest drag strips at the time, Norm set the world on fire by running an 863 at about 163 miles an hour. It was such an epic thing that it was on the front page of a newspaper in California. And none other than the person he did that feat against, well, it was Don Gay. So that's trolling, epic trolling between these guys, whether it's in letters, whether it's in pictures, however, whether it's at the track. They trolled each other, but you know what? They respected each other. Business on the track, run your mouth elsewhere. But when it comes down to it, guys, that was just the name of the game in the 60s. I really hope you enjoyed this video. It's kind of from one of my archives. Absolutely kind of a neat subject of trolling before trolling was a thing. Like I said, Norm had the experience on that. He did this so much back in the day. He had a very great sense of humor. He was very competitive, but you know what? These guys, they respected each other. Yeah, things got heated on the tracks. I've heard a lot of stories, but that's just the name of the game. These guys wanted to win. They were very proud of what they were doing. And I'm just going to say I have mad respect for Norm and Don Gay, because Norm was kind of the king at the time of match racing. And you got this young Texas teenager who's just real fire. He has that grit and wants to make a name for himself. And ultimately he did. That family went on to have multiple different funny cars throughout the years. And they were even racing into the 80s and 90s. And that dealership is actually still around. So that's a very awesome story right there. But I hope you enjoyed this. Trolling before trolling was a thing. Absolutely cool if you ask me. Kind of wish I was around. I'd have been doing this type of trolling. Because to be honest with you, internet trolling, well, that's just, keyboard warrior. This right here, these guys actually had to put their money where their mouth was. Have a good one.